me to speak in English because our guest of honor, I must add. No, I'm really thrilled to meet you today. I don't know if you already read or met or heard about Danny Ahmad Ramadan.
You can call me Danny if you want. Yeah.
The full name.
My father calls me Ahmed, and the last time he called me was like 10 years ago, so...
So you remember your father, it's good.
So, ahlan wa sahlan, marhaba.
مرحبا شكرا.
I'm sorry, this ends my knowledge in Arabic, but one day in the future...
It's better than my knowledge in Hebrew. I know Shalom and I know Sababa, so... There we go.
Perfect, I think we're set. Sababa, we'll go everywhere with Sababa here. So as you probably all know, this is Danny's first visit to Israel, and he was born and raised in Syria and then immigrated to Canada on 5 years ago. He had a very, it's like a life story that I think could make a very nice movie film.
I think Julia Roberts would be playing a great job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have 1 million questions for you. It's really interesting to meet you in person. First of all, because none of us usually meets a Syrian regularity on a daily basis, you know. Mm-hmm. And I find it quite brave of you to come to Israel, even though you're already Canadian.
Thank you.
But it's an experience that I'm sure was not easy for you, because as a Syrian born and raised, like us, born and raised to think specific things about the other side, let's call it politely.
Yeah.
I wonder, what is your impression? You've been here for 4 days. What is your impression to visit this place that you only heard of before?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. I decided intentionally not to have any prejudgments about my visit to Israel. By the way, this visit has been in the plans for a year, a full year. We have been talking about this. And I have decided not to think about what I'm going to see here. Because I didn't want to build any expectations other than the ones that I learned from meeting people like you, from coming to this place and getting to know you folks. So when I arrived, I also, honestly, I didn't know if the security at the airport are going to let me in or not.
So did it pass well?
They took like 2 hours and a half, and like
2.5 hours.
Yeah,
wow.
but I hear that other people take like 12 or 14, and they're sent back sometimes. So I'm like, yeah, 2.5 hours, and they were very nice to me. They asked me the same questions 3 times, 3 interviews, the same questions.
It's not 2.5 hours.
Please, just allow me. We will have time for audience, but it's not. It's not a dialogue with the audience. So excuse me, but we will go on with the interview, and then we will have some 15 to 20 minutes for questions, if you don't mind.
Yes. So I didn't want to have any expectations, and then when I arrived and after I went through the security, I ended up at the other side in Tel Aviv airport, and I remember I looked at Matthew. Matthew is my partner, my fiance is sitting right there.
And they're going to be married in October.
Yes, we are.
Congratulations. Mazel tov, you should know that too.
Yes, yeah. That I know as well, Mazel tov.
Oh, don't be sad.
Yeah, and I stood there and I was like, I suddenly got so excited. I got giggly and I was like, oh my God, I'm here. Mm-hmm. I've been hearing about this place literally since the first thought that I had, the first memories that I have.
So this is the question. What do you hear about Israel when you grow as a Syrian boy?
We hear a lot of bullshit, to be honest. I think
Give us a taste.
All right, sure. I grew up in Damascus. I grew up under the Assad regime, and we have a lot of propaganda about what Israel is. I believe that the Syrian government needed to stay in power, and the way that they needed to stay in power is by creating a boogeyman, an enemy, so the Syrian people would feel that they have the Syrian regime protecting them from the enemy. We grew up with a lot of misinformation about Israel, very specific propaganda. There's a lot of rumors, for example, that when I was 12 or 13, a friend of mine told me that Israelis drink people's blood, for example.
Wow.
Because this is the kind of, like, it's the enemy where we're scared of you. You know what I mean? And when I was 24, that story I think I told earlier to a friend of mine here. When I was 24, I went to Egypt, as I told you earlier, and I ended up at the Red Sea, and it was the first time that I meet an actual Israeli in person.
And he didn't have the horns.
And they didn't have the horns. I was very surprised. I looked very well, and no horns. And we started having a conversation, and we were sitting around in a bar. I was dating this Italian person at the time, and it's everybody else around me is either American, European, or Israeli, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and everybody's like kind of tipsy, and we ended up talking about the relationship between Syria and Israel, and I leaned on the Israeli person, and I was like, I'm sure, however, that you're really, really sad that you lost the war back in 1973. And like, there was silence in the bar. Everybody is like, what? And like, me from my side, I was like, what? You lost the war in 19... And they're like, no.
We never lose, don't you know? Even when we lose, we don't lose.
Exactly. And like, it was the first time in my life, I read that in history books in Syria. Like, this is something that we learn in schools, that Syria won the war in 1973, the October War in 1973. We celebrate the victory every year on the 16th of October. Every year it's a national holiday that we won the war against Israel. So
there's one good point. You earn a national day off from work because of us.
Yes, we got a holiday, thank you, appreciate it, thank you. So I think that was the day, I remember that incident very important for me, because that was the day that I was like, I don't know anything about you. I don't know anything about Israel. Everything that I know about Israel is based on the propaganda of the Syrian government. And if they're willing to lie about something as big as winning a war and make it sound so glorious from my side, then how many other lies there are out there? And that's why I ended up being more open to research and to understand the different narratives that each side is trying to present. Because I don't think the Israeli side is saying the full truth as well. I think there's also the government here would have its own propagandas and the ways that they want the Israeli people to feel about themselves and about the government.
Yeah, except for one thing, they never told us that you drink children's blood. We have our limits, you know. Anyway, so it was quite an excitement, and weren't you even a bit fearful coming over?
It was actually, I take that back to the time that Shai got in touch with me. Shai Sadiq, everybody is. Your last name is Sadiq, yes? Sadiq. Yes. So Shai Sadiq is my publisher here, the publisher of Hebrew here, with the who's his partner. He got in touch with me in 2017 when the book was released and was like, would you like to publish the book in Hebrew? And I of course thought about the fact that not a lot of Arabs, no Arab I know of, allowed their work to be translated into Hebrew. And I thought about the many things that we hear about, specifically as a gay man, pinkwashing, the fact that Israel tried to push for human rights when it comes to gay people as a way to counter the narrative about violations of human rights that they do. So I thought about all of those things, but at the end of the day, I'm an artist and I'm a writer. And what I want to do is I want to create a dialogue. I want to have bits and pieces of my art be fulfilled by the readers themselves. I don't think anybody writes a book to the perfection of the book. I think the book is written to a point where the reader will be able to insert themselves into the book. And I wanted you folks to be inserted into my book. I wanted you to be part of my word. And I don't think that's a bad thing to do. And the same goes for my visit here. When I was told by the festival that they're interested in inviting me here, I said yes because I want to know more, and I want you to know more. I want you to know more about me. I don't represent all Syrians or all Arabs or all refugees or all Muslims or all gays or all anything. I represent only myself. But at the end of the day, having a conversation between you as an Israeli, as a person who you are, and me as an Arab, as a person who I am, is literally the smallest step we take into understanding one another.
And I hope it will be only the first step. Thank you for the initiative. So you're here for 4 days. You've been visiting Jerusalem, the old city, all the sacred places. Did you go to the Temple Mount?
I did. Yeah.
Are you religious or secular or what?
I'm spiritual. I believe that there is a higher power of some sort up there in the universe. I believe that the universe is meaningful in the way that it's created. And I believe that that higher power will judge us on our good or bad. And that comes from treating other people. If we are treating ourselves and other people in a good way, we are going to be rewarded somehow. I don't understand how. I think it's bigger than me. But it's a drive for me to try my very best and fail sometimes to do the good I can in the world.
Going back to your life story.
Yeah.
Just a bit. I heard you speaking TED. You have a TED performance. So from what I've heard from you, it was you spoke very briefly because TED is short, of course, and now we have the whole night if you want. No, we have an hour. But how was it to grow up as a homosexual in Syria? When did you find out about it? When did you tell anybody about it? And how did you cope with it? It's never easy. Even in Israel, it's never easy. But how is it in Syria?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's never easy to anybody. I think that people learn about their sexuality at a certain age, be it straight or gay or anything else that is on that spectrum. And it was the same for me. I learned about my sexuality at the age of 12 or 13. And I find it funny when like somebody asks me, so when did you learn that you're gay? And I'm like, that's a great question. When did you learn that you're straight? So there's that. But growing up in Syria specifically, we're talking about a place where homosexuality is criminalized by the regime, by the law. A gay man getting caught in Syria is criminalized under an act called committing an act against God. And
against God?
Yes. And it's punishable by 3 years in prison and public shaming, where they put your picture in newspapers to tell people to stay away from you.
Like a pedophile or something.
Like a pedophile, yes. They do the same for pedophiles as well. It's the law that covers all of anything that they consider outside of the heterosexual normative relationship. Let alone that, of course, my family is very conservative. My father is very conservative. My father is extremely, is the idea of what a Muslim man is, you know? Like, I think he knew that I was gay, like, just to quote my own TED Talk. I think he knew that I was gay since I was, like, 4 or 5, and he tried to, like, get it out of me by presenting me all of those, like, macho activities.
Like what?
He enrolled me in boxing. He really did. He enrolled me in boxing at the age of 6. He enrolled me in an Islamic school. He got me a job as at a construction site. He tried to like do all the manly things that you can think of, like any manly thing you can think of, he tried to do. So now I have a very, very strong right hook. So I still know boxing. You don't need to F with me. I know the Quran by heart, despite the fact that I don't identify as a Muslim. I know how to wire a whole house, but I'm still gay. Sorry, Dad. So that's my childhood, really. That's the way that I navigated my childhood. I remember I was always conflicted between the age, I would say, 12 and 15 about my sexuality, because I felt that there's nothing I can do to change it. And I kept talking, like, at the time I was trying to understand religion, so I kept talking to God, being like, just give me an answer, just like tell me what should I do, because I don't know what to do here.
You probably felt very guilty.
I felt very guilty, I felt very ashamed, I felt very lonely. It was, I remember like I would be in school and I would see all the other boys around me and they're all like playing together and being like themselves, and I felt that I'm the loneliest person in all of Damascus. And then when I was 15, I kissed a boy for the very first time. And it felt so connective. It wasn't about the sexuality of it. It wasn't about that. It just, I felt seen by that person. I felt that I'm cared for. And I felt that I care for that person. It was the most beautiful feeling that, honest to God, that 15-year-old Danny ever experienced in his life. And then I had a choice. I'm either going to believe that the society is right, that religion is right, that the government is right, that homosexuality is a sin, or I have to believe in that beautiful, beautiful feeling that I had, and that I'm just falling in love with somebody else, and they just happen to be a boy. I
And
think
did
that
he was falling in love with you too, or
we were boyfriends for 3 years, yes.
for 3 years?
3 years, 3 years.
So you kept it secret, I presume.
I came out when I was 17. He didn't. He ended up being married. He's actually married to a woman and have 3 children.
Wow.
Yeah. I have him on Facebook. He's my friend on Facebook. It's I have a lot of friends on Facebook, but I don't talk to any of them.
So when did you
my father.
when did you tell your parents? At 17?
At 17. I told my father when I was 17.
Wow.
My family is very dysfunctional. I think they should have never had me to begin with. I think my father was 18 when he had me, and my mother was 17. And I think they are the product of their society. When you tell an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old that they can't fall in love, they are going to try their very best to fall in love. So I think they tried too hard and they weren't meant for one another, but then they ended up pregnant, and then they ended up having to get married, and then they stayed together for 17, 18 years, despite the fact that they were never meant for one another. Just because I was there, I was the product of their hope for a love.
What was their reaction when you told them? I mean, your
my father
father's
kicked me out. I actually we had a very violent interaction.
violent,
Very violent.
physically also.
Physically also. And then he kicked me out of the house. I lived on the streets for 6 months. And then I was taken in by a trans sex worker who raised me up for 1.5 years and put me through college.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a lovely person actually. She is the closest thing that I have to a mother figure really. She is this trans person in Syria. She escaped her family. She was much older than me. She was in her 30s when I was in 17, and she just saw me multiple times on the streets, and then she was like, you know what? I live on my own. I have a lot of my clients who come over, and I need somebody to be at the house. Would you like to stay with me? And I'm like, sure. So I ended up living with her for 1.5 years, and she paid for my college. She put me through college. And then when I ended up publishing my first book in Egypt, I left that house, and she helped me actually buy the ticket to go to Egypt.
Wow. She still lives in Syria?
No, she lives in Turkey. I told her like 3 years ago, I do a lot of work in Canada on supporting LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans identifying refugees, specifically from Syria, to come to Canada. So I went to her like a couple of years ago and was talking to her on Facebook, being like, hey, so I'm doing this work. Would you like to come to Canada? Would you like me to help you come to Canada? It's like, no. Business is perfect here in Turkey. Why would I ever leave? Yeah, she has her own business at the moment in Turkey.
So living on the streets must be a nightmare. How do you live on the streets? What do you do to survive?
Okay, I think that this is the limit of where we're going to push. How about that?
Thank you.
If that's okay with you.
Sure, of course. That was the agreement beforehand.
Thank you very much.
There are
I really
answers
appreciate it.
there are questions that are not answered. It's okay.
That's totally fine.
So your mother, are you in touch with your parents today?
No, I'm not
No,
in touch with my
no.
parents or my sisters. I have 4 sisters and 1 much younger brother. We haven't been in touch for ages. We tried to mend things when I was around 28, but it didn't work out. So, c'est la vie, I guess. I have a very beautiful spiritual family, though. So my wedding, as we said earlier, is in October, and I happen to have my best people, my best man and my best woman in the wedding are my spiritual family, my friends for the last 10, 15 years who have been with me in the ups and downs. I think family is about the connections that we create, about people that you trust with everything, about people that you will never let go of regardless of anything. And all of the above fits those people. So I'm quite comfortable with the spiritual family that I have.
I'm so happy you are.
Thank you.
So when and how did you leave Syria? How did it end that you had to leave Syria? Because I presume you didn't choose to leave Syria.
I did not. There's this concept that a lot of refugees leave the country because they want to leave the country. Specifically in my story, I didn't want to leave Syria.
Even though of the war that was going on for years and years.
I was actually having I was having a very fulfilling life when I was in Syria. So I went back to Syria. I lived across the Middle East for a while. I lived in Egypt for a while, and I went back to Syria in 2010, late 2010, early 2011. I started moving back to Syria, and when I arrived, I could tell that there was a movement that is happening, a political movement that was happening. At the time, it was a revolution. Excuse me. It turned later on into a civil war for so many different reasons, including the fault of the regime and the fault of the people themselves. But it started at the time as a civil rights movement, really. And I felt that I can have a part in that movement. I really did. I met a lot of people in Syria in those first 6 months of me arriving between 2010 2011 that I felt so inspired by. Folks who want democracy, folks who are learning about what it means to demand human rights, folks who are welcoming to me as a whole, as the person who is gay as well. And that felt so fulfilling for me. And then I decided to do my part. So me and my best friend, she is a lesbian woman, we turned my apartment in Damascus into an LGBTQ underground center. So we started doing events like card games tournaments and sharing circles, and I would download gay movies, not that kind of gay movies. I would download gay themed movies to share with the people who never had access to this material. So the gays really loved The Birdcage by Robin Williams, if you've ever seen it. It's such a good movie. And the lesbians really liked the Vagina Monologues, which is also an HBO show. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. It's such a good show. And then we started inviting people to come to this house. It started just the two of us. In a year and a half, it ended up around 150 people who knew about the house.
So you were operating a year and a half without the regime, without the government trying to stop you or arrest anybody?
I think the minute that they found out about us, I got arrested.
So you managed to stay underground for a year and a half?
We managed to stay underground for a year and a half until somebody told the wrong person who told the wrong person who told the government on us, basically. I got arrested in an airport. I was arrested for 6 weeks, which you're going to ask about, and I'm going to tell you that I actually don't remember much about it.
Really?
I really don't.
You know, it's one of the greatest nightmares of every Israeli soldier, the prison, the Damascus prison. So I was wondering.
I honestly don't remember anything about it. I have scars, but You
were tortured?
I don't remember much about it, probably.
Wow.
My therapist tells me that I go to therapy, by the way. It's such a good thing. You should try it sometimes. I really highly recommend it. My therapist tells me that my body, my mind decided that you really don't need to remember this, so why would you bother? And I agree with her. Why would I bother? And then I was released
after 6 months.
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Thanks God.
And I was released. Actually, not officially released. My best friend gathered funds from all around, and she bribed an officer who literally got me out of prison overnight.
This woman that took you out of the street, your angel?
No,
another one.
My best friend, my lesbian best friend.
Okay.
She did that. Fadia, the trans woman, she was in Turkey by then. And I was told that you have to leave the country right now. They told me that if I stayed in the country, I'll be arrested again. So I ended up leaving. I ended up Masa drove the lesbian woman drove me across the borders to Lebanon. My friend in Lebanon, who is now my best man, received me, took care of me. He bought me a laptop and a mobile and helped me rent an apartment.
Where did you live? In Beirut or
in Hamra in Beirut?
Hamra.
Yeah. Which is funny because both of them and I ended up sponsoring them to come to Canada. So when he came to Canada, I also welcomed him. He crashed at my place and I bought him a laptop and I bought him a mobile.
Can I be your friend? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm out of laptops. I'm sorry. Yeah, and I ended up living in Lebanon for 2 years.
Okay, so you escaped from one war zone to, in our eyes, another war zone. I mean, you lived most of your life in war zones, and I wonder, how does it feel? I mean, in the book you describe in one of the scenes, actually quite at the beginning, the bombardment that crushed into your lovemaking with your fiancé. And I was wondering, is that happening on a daily basis over there?
It happens on a daily basis, but as humans do, we live with it. It becomes so normal to have that, and you start to navigate it. There's another scene in the book where they go to a nightclub, but they arrive at the nightclub at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they start partying at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because they know that there's a curfew at 11, and so they put black curtains all over the place, and they start drinking and partying as if it's midnight. But and that's what happened in Damascus. People just try to live with it, because if you're going to sit there thinking all the time, there's a war outside, I might die every minute, that's not a life, and that's not a way that the brain is going to function to begin with. So you live with it, you navigate it the best you can.
So people are going on living their lives over there. I mean, from what I saw on TV, which is quite suspicious always, of course, it's like ruins all over in Damascus.
That is suspicious.
The city looks like if that it was bombarded for years, and there's nothing left over there.
There are neighborhoods in Damascus that have been bombarded for years, and those neighborhoods are destroyed, and the neighborhood right next to it has a nightclub where people are going partying, because this is how war functions. There are people and there are civilians who just are living their lives, you know what I mean? And there's no way around it. Like, if you're going to live all of your life in the stress of war, it's going to kill you. You're going to have a heart attack and die.
Sounds so familiar, doesn't it? It's the same.
Yeah, I assume it's the same for you. I assume
no,
it's
right. Just last week we suffered like 700 bombings coming from Gaza to the areas and the villages and the cities nearby, and Ashdod and Ashkelon, and it happens a lot.
And I'm sure that some of the Israeli folks, when they hear there are 700 bombardments that happened over the weekend, they're like, okay,
yeah,
all right,
and they zip their espresso.
Yeah, exactly. And
also
like,
in Jerusalem, not only in Tel Aviv. Yeah.
So yeah, I think so, and I think that it has an impact, though. I think that, like, to go back to therapy, we as humans have our ability to handle stress, and that ability of handling stress grows with the stresses that are around us. And a war is the biggest of all stresses, because you're not sure about your safety, about your home, about your food, about any of the important basic needs of a human life. But you live with the stress. You learn to live with the stress. So when I arrived to Canada, my stress levels are right here, and they don't drop at the airport. Like, people think that, like, now that you're in Canada, you're safe. My body doesn't understand that yet. My mind, like, my logic understands that, but my body still wants to produce this level of stress. While everybody around me, all the other Canadians around me who have been, like, eating quinoa and doing yoga, their level of stress is right here, you know? So just, my first year in Canada was so dramatic, because I was so dramatic. I was so stressed all the time, and everybody around me is just like, oh, relax, just relax, everything is fine here. I'm like, I'll look for the button, Just give me a second. I'll like press a button here and I'll relax right away, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now I eat quinoa and I do yoga.
It's very relaxing, as you know.
No, yes.
So, how was it? This was the beginning, but you're 5 years Canadian, and you refer yourself as a Syrian Canadian.
Yes.
What is the Canadian part in your personality nowadays, if you can separate the Syrian part and the Canadian part?
I don't think I can, though. I don't think I can separate those two. It's the same idea of like when I'm in one place, I'm gay or not. I'm always gay. I'm gay when I'm eating breakfast, and I'm gay when I'm hanging out with you right now, and I'm gay when I'm sleeping. I'm always gay, and I'm always Syrian, and I'm always Canadian. There's no way to like turn that off, you know what I mean?
But you know what I mean.
I know
Before
what
we
you mean.
spoke about it, Canadians
Yeah.
are more polite than us, the Mediterraneans. They're different
Yes.
in some way.
I would say
so
we're very we're very interesting kind of people. We are. We're very we're challenged by speaking up our minds, and we would rather let you navigate that conversation with us rather than have a conflict with you. I would say, okay, so to be more serious, I think that over the past 5 years, I have learned so much about Canadians. I have fallen in love with Canada. I've fallen in love with Vancouver. I've fallen in love with a Canadian boy. He's from the prairies. He's a cowboy deep down in the heart. Don't be fooled by his pink socks. He's actually a cowboy right there. I fell in love with the city, with the people, with the way of living, with the way of communicating. I think that it's beautiful and it's meaningful, and they are. You ask a Canadian, what are you as a Canadian? And they're like, not American.
yeah, right. Exactly.
So I think that this is beautiful, and I call Canada home. I really do, but I also call Syria home, and I call Cairo home. It's because I don't think of home as one place. I think I'm monogamous when it comes to relationships. I'm not monogamous when it comes to homes. I think I can have multiple homes at the same time, and there's nothing wrong with that. I highly doubt I'll ever go back to Syria. I highly doubt I'll ever visit Damascus.
You never visited since you left.
I don't think
You can't.
I can't because
can't.
I'm wanted there, and I don't think after this visit I will ever be welcome there.
That's a good point.
So
yeah,
after
that's the end of it.
today,
Yeah.
I don't know. They also, one of the chapters of the book is basically like a court order against Hafez al-Assad. Like there's a whole chapter in the book where Hafez al-Assad is like being judged for all of his actions. So also, I don't think the Syrian regime will look very kindly on that. Yeah.
No, but seriously, would you like to go back to Syria one day, if ever the regime will change?
I think, in a perfect word, in a word that is made completely up by my imagination, and I highly doubt that will actually happen, there's going to be a pride parade in Damascus every year. The regime is going to be democratic and very similar to how Canada is run. And in that word, I think I would like to retire, in which I spend half of the year, the summer, in Canada, not the winter.
No.
Not the winter. And spend the other half of the year in Damascus. In that perfect word, I would love to go back. But I don't want to be back in the closet. I don't want to hide who I am anymore. I have worked so hard to be the Syrian, Canadian, gay man with a refugee experience who's an author. I worked so hard to be all of those things together and to get this, like, all of those identities. They're like little Dannies who are sitting around the table, and they used to, like 5 years ago, they used to be throwing chairs at each other around that table, and now they sit so politely and talk to each other around that table.
You're
which
in
is
peace.
Yeah, after therapy, yes, therapy is really good. Again, therapy, folks, yes, yay. Oh my God, that's really worked. So yeah, and I think like I worked really hard for all of those identities to come together and for me to be all of those people at the same time. And I don't want to be in a place where I hide any part of who I am. So unless Syria can welcome all of me, I'm going to sit on the other side of the word and be loving but critical.
What is your perspective? What do you think will happen in Syria in the next couple of years? I mean, nobody knows the future, of course, but as a Syrian who looks And I'm sure that you follow the news. You're
I
still
actually don't.
You don't?
I don't.
Wow.
Because my therapist told me not to.
Oh, she's a wise
I
woman.
know, she is a very smart
Yeah.
woman. Honestly, I know the generalities, so I have like a report that I get from like different websites once a week that lets me know what's going on, but I don't like follow every single detail and every explosion, every conflict, because it's just too
To go back to the
Too hard.
PTSD. Yeah.
it's really too hard. So I protect myself, and when I'm not ready, if in 1 week I'm not ready to read that report, I click delete, and I'm not going to read it now. But I do understand the generalities of what's going on in Syria, and I think that the logical me is not very optimistic, because the war can end tomorrow morning, like literally. And I don't think it's going to happen, but let's imagine that all the sides in the war and all of those other powers that are supporting all the different sides in the war decided, you know what, we're going to end this war. Again, never going to happen, but let's say that's going to happen. We're talking about a country where its people, for 8 years, different sects were fighting each other. And those people are not just going to go back and start shaking hands and be friends again. Those people are not going to go back and build from the start. Those people don't have the resources to build from the start. It takes $26 billion to rebuild Aleppo, and that's one city in Syria. We're not talking about the small villages here and there. You know what I mean? So I think it is... I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that Syria, because I love Syria so much, I love my home, my heritage there, I hope that it will one day be one of the most beautiful countries again in the world. But it will require so much work, and it will require a different mentality to how to run it. A mentality that is, that is more Canadian actually than Syrian. A mentality about having dialogues, about opening bridges, about seeing the beauty of Syria and not just build another building, but actually build people together.
How many people fled Syria? Do you have any idea in
7
percentage?
million people.
7 million.
Syrians
Out of how many?
23 million in 2015.
Wow, so it's almost third of the population left.
And there is 6 million who are internally displaced. So those are people who used to live all of their lives in, say, Aleppo, but they were forced to leave into, say, Damascus because it's safer. So there is almost half of the country, more than half of the country is affected by the war in drastic ways. Everybody is affected by the war one way or another.
You mean about the humanitarian crisis also?
There are 7 million refugees out there. Canada taps itself on the shoulder. See, I can criticize Canada. Canada taps itself on the shoulder for taking 40,000 refugees from Syria in 2 years. And that's great, but that's a drop in the pocket. That is literally nothing. When we're talking about 7 million refugees, 3 million of them are in Lebanon, and the Lebanese people are 3 million. So there is a Lebanese for every Syrian in Lebanon.
Wow.
So and Lebanon is a tiny little country that has its own problems. Hezbollah, anyone? So so there's that, you know what I mean? So adding all of that pressure on Lebanon, of course you'll end up with xenophobia in Lebanon. Of course the Lebanese are going to hate the Syrians. So there's that other aspect to the war between Syria and within Syria. It's going to cause a lot of the Lebanese people to hate Syrian people for something that is neither the fault of Syrians or Lebanese.
Yeah. You helped gay people from Syria escape, right? Tell us about it, please.
Sure.
How did you do it?
So I was way more active in the first 3 years that I was in Canada. And I'll tell you why that I'm not as active right now. When I arrived in Canada, I was driven by my survival's guilt. I felt that I got so much privilege just by being there in that safety, while everybody else that I know were in Lebanon having the same difficulties that I was having. So I ended up doing something. We have in Canada something called private sponsorship program, where the Canadian government allows its citizens, Canadian citizens, to come together and volunteer together and privately sponsor a refugee to come to Canada. So all the government has to do is sign up on the papers, and the citizens will volunteer to raise money, so they will cover the first year of that person's arrival, to teach the person how to open a bank account or how to navigate a city and how to get on like transit and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Help them get a job and stuff like that. And that's how I arrived to Canada. This is the program that I was sponsored through. So I ended up using that system in getting so many Canadians to actually bring Syrian gay people to Canada. I ended up in total getting 28 people out of the Middle East to Canada. I also started running. It was funny because I started it as this like tiny little fundraiser that I did, where I like got like my friends to cook Syrian food, and like I played some Syrian music in the background and got people a lot of alcohol, and then I asked them for money, and I started and it always works. Get people drunk and ask them for money, works like charm. And then I ask them for money, and then they donate the money to an organization called Rainbow Refugee that specifies in sponsoring refugees who are gay from all across the world. Now this event has raised over $100,000 in the past 5 years. It's now one of the biggest events that happens in Vancouver across the year. I have a bank sponsoring it this year, which is amazing. They paid me money to run it, which is wonderful. Thank you. I paid the money back to the organization. So this is what I do.
So you do it in Vancouver. You raise money in Vancouver.
I raise money, and I used to build sponsorship groups until, I would say, 2 years ago, when we had one person. He's Syrian. He had a heart disease. He's gay as well. And we wanted to get him to Canada. And we worked the whole application, and we did everything right. And he went to the Canadian embassy. He did his interview. He aced his interview. They told him, you're coming to Canada. We booked him the flight. He was flying in September 2017, and he passed away in August 2017.
Oh.
And that really broke my heart. That really, like, I was like, I can't be opening up to that grief anymore. I just can't. So now I just focus on the fundraising. I get other people like the lesbian woman that is now living with nearby in Vancouver. She does a lot of that work, the face-to-face work, while I just organize the fundraising to help them.
So your friend left with you on this?
No, actually, she arrived a year ago. Yeah, I sponsored her to come. Like this way,
okay.
She's one of the 28 people.
Okay.
Yeah, I sponsored her to come to Canada. Yeah.
So this book, how long did it take you to write it? It's your first book in English, right?
It's my first book in English.
And you wrote it in English, or did you write it in Arabic and then translated it?
I wrote it in English, and when I finished writing it in English, I read it once, and I'm like, nobody is going to read this shit. Nobody. And now I'm in Israel, with people are reading it in Hebrew, apparently. So, yeah, I wrote it in English. It was my first project in English ever.
By the way, where does your English come from? Because you have such an
you
excellent...
know the answer.
It's not
just
5
like
years.
it.
Well, they should know
They
also.
should know the answer. I fell in love with one of the Backstreet Boys when I was 12, and I wanted to know what the hell he's singing about. So here we go.
It's a great school.
And he's really handsome, Brian. He's really handsome. Oh my God. I'm sorry, baby. I love you.
That was a long time ago.
I still, to be honest, I still...
Okay.
So I wrote it in English. It took around 2.5 years. I started writing it in 2012. I finished 6 months after I arrived to Canada.
You finished it. The first draft was ready. So you were writing your trauma, basically.
Yes, my therapist says that if I didn't write that book, most probably I've committed suicide. So I'm very happy that I wrote that book. I wrote it dealing with my trauma, not knowing that I was dealing with my trauma. I was just writing a book, and it finished, and I read it, and I hated it, and I put it in a drawer, and I never looked at it for a year. And then I was doing something exactly like this. I was invited to speak in a conference, in a place called Harrison Springs, which is a beautiful hot springs area in British Columbia, the province I live in. And I finished doing my speech, and I did the spiel. I did the thing that I do. I make jokes, and I laugh, and I say meaningful things, and people laugh some more, and people connect. And I did the whole spiel, and I ended up with the, yeah. No, I'm really authentic. I promise you. I really do. Oh my God. And then after I finished, this person came to me and was like, hey, how about you write a memoir? Did you think of writing a memoir? I'm like, I'm 30. I was at the time 32 or 33. I was like, I'm like really young to write a memoir. Like, what the hell? That's the worst idea ever. But I have this novel, if you like. And he turns out to be a small publishing house. And within 3 months later, the book was on the shelves.
So you didn't really edit it. I mean, usually
we had
after
an
you
editor.
write, you
Yeah.
have. But I edit my books for a year.
Mm.
And
I didn't edit. I honestly didn't think that he's going to say yes. I, honest to God, did not think that he's going to say yes, I'll publish this book. I sent him a book, and a month later, he emailed me being like, all right, here's the contract, and here's your editor, and this is what we're going to do. I'm like, oh. And like working with the editor, the book was 120,000 words, by the way. The version that you read is 80,000 words. There's 40,000 words that ended up disappearing. Also, I would say that from the original 120,000 words, there's around like 50, 60,000 words that are in the book, and the rest are new things that I had to add. Like my editor and I, we worked day and night for 3 months. She is this really tentative reader. She is very attentive to details. She sees a beautiful story and she's like, you know, how about you, like, you see this one sentence, how about you make it like 3 pages? And yeah, and she was fantastic, really. She really helped shape the book. I honestly, I'm like, honest to God, like I would be nothing without my editor and my translator. Where's Lee? Lee, everybody, she's my translator. Yes, I would be nothing without those folks, because to be honest, like they push me forward. And like I think that the thing that gets my talent writing is when I'm challenged. I'm actually doing my master's at the moment, doing my master's at UBC, University of British Columbia. And
in what? In literature?
In creative writing. I'm doing in creative writing specifically. So I'm doing my thesis in which is going to be my next novel. And there, I'm not competitive at all, but I'm the top of my class. and when that happens, you get to choose whichever professor you want to be your mentor, your supervisor, your thesis supervisor. And everybody is like, pick Annabelle, she's really easy on you. Pick such and such, they are really easy on you. And I'm like, who's going to be the hardest on me? And I picked really the teacher, the professor is going to be the most challenging, because I really believe that I need to be better. And if you didn't challenge me, if you told me that everything I do is perfect, then how am I going to be better?
Are you sure you're not Jewish, Bachin?
I think I actually...
I don't know if it's a compliment or not, but this is the point.
I actually got the DNA test, and apparently like 12 generations back, I had Sumeric blood in me, like Jewish blood in me.
I told you. We're all nuts in the same way.
We are. Yes, we're cousins at the end of the day.
So it took you. It was a big success in Canada.
I am as surprised as you are.
No, I'm not surprised at all.
I was.
But for first novel, it's a wow. I mean,
I'm very
weren't
grateful.
you walking on air? Aren't you still?
I am so ready for the next one. That's the thing. Like, I think that this book, I'm so happy with it. It continues to be successful. It's going to be, don't tell anybody, I didn't tell you this. It's released in French in August, but I'm not supposed to say that yet.
So it's a secret.
So it's a secret between me and all 100 of you.
And the camera over there. But
and the camera,
we will cut it.
Delete that. Oh my God. My
so it was
publisher is going to kill me.
translated to Hebrew and French,
So
but we don't say it?
Yes, so it's translated to Hebrew, French, Spanish, and German. So
Nice.
which is amazing. I'm so happy with all of that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm. Yes. Keep giving me appreciation. Thank you. It makes me feel so bad.
No, what we say here
Yes.
is, no, stop. Go on.
Go on. Tell me more. Tell me more. Oh my God. So it's. I'm ready for the next book because I feel like over the last 3 years, as a writer, I have evolved quite a lot. And my next book, I'm midway through writing, like 30,
You're
40.
midway through your...
It's going to be my thesis. I'm supposed to start writing in September, but I kind of started writing already. So I'm like 30,000, 40,000 words in,
Wow.
which is awesome. It's called The Foghorn Echoes. And The Foghorn Echoes.
Who invites the names for you? You?
Actually, him. We.
No, also, this book has a beautiful name, and this
Thank
is
you.
another one. So, would you tell us the general theme, or it's,
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I think it's about the lies that we tell ourselves, so we can continue being at war with one another.
At war with one another.
Yes,
Mhm.
it's a story. It's Isabelle Lind. I'm sure you've read Isabelle Lind, The House of Ghosts.
Yes.
She is a Latin American author, award-winning, amazing person.
Isabelle Allende. You mean,
Yes. She was visiting UBC, the university where I'm studying, and I ended up talking to her, and she told me that the best kind of books are the ones that focus on the smallest stories, while the background is the biggest of stories. So something like the book is about two men who had an accident that it wasn't the fault of either of them really when they were 15 or 16, but they kept hating each other and reimagining their lives and like telling the same stories over and over, but keep adding details to make sure that they keep hating each other, rather the fact than looking inwards and deciding to be like, you know what, it was an accident. And I want to see how far those two characters are going to take this bullshit attitude, and how far they're going to go, and how much they're going to harm themselves rather than harm each other. So that's the whole idea. The title comes from Matthew because we live in Vancouver in Canada, and it's on the ocean. It's on the Pacific Ocean, and it gets really foggy in there in the winter. So one day at 3 o'clock in the morning, me and my PTSD self were asleep, and then the foghorn came around, and I jumped out of bed like a crazy person, being like, is this the war? Is this the apocalypse? And he's like, it's a foghorn, calm the fuck down, go back to sleep. So, and then I just couldn't go back to sleep, and 4 hours later, the first chapter was written.
Wow.
The first chapter was written. Yeah.
So you're speaking with yourself basically in this book.
I think
in a way.
I think that I'm not speaking with myself anymore. I'm looking back at the way that I was speaking with myself back in the day. I look at the way that I was conflicting with myself so much before the therapy and before trying to understand myself and before trying to, instead of being so negative to myself, actually trying to be forgiving to myself. Because they say, like, the thing about war is that you get overwhelmed and then you hate yourself because you are overwhelmed. Despite the fact that it's war, it's totally normal that you're overwhelmed. If you're not overwhelmed, you're a psychopath.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and it's such an easy thing to say right now, but it took so much work to stop blaming myself for being overwhelmed or scared or feared or being conflicted or being in or having a trauma because of war. Instead of looking back at that with shame, I look back at that with kindness now. And I'm as I'm writing this book, I'm looking at that Danny and the way that I handled myself back then, and I want to write about that because I feel like that's a story that needs to be written.
I thank you so much for your braveness and speaking about it, really. All the best. You're a very courageous guy. It's not easy to write like this.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So at this point, we will open the discussion for questions. Yes, please.
Two very short questions.
How about I answer
Yeah,
the
yeah,
first
one
thing
by
and
one.
then we'll go for the second one. I wrote in Syria about broken hearts and poems and boys falling in love and stuff like that, and they were all heterosexual relationships. And I never mentioned politics, and I've never mentioned like I wouldn't have a father figure that is a bit difficult. For example, fathers are always lovely. Any authority figure in any novel is such a good thing to have. So. My first two collections of short stories were fairy tales. They were mermaids and cats speaking to each other and stuff like that. Like I wanted to write things, and I wanted it to be so subtextual, so like under the line, and I didn't know how to write that while still being safe, except if I talked about it as if it's a fairy tale. So that's the answer for your question. Yes.
I lived in Canada, I lived in Toronto for 2 years, a long time ago, and there's a standing joke. The standing joke was in Montreal. If Montreal had a quiz, and the first prize was 1 day in Toronto, and the second prize was 2 days in Toronto. In other words, a very bland, anemic society.
Yes.
What do you find in society that stimulates you as a writer?
Good question,
That's
if
a
I may.
great question. Oh my God. I think that Canada, over the past, since the time that you were there up until now, has evolved quite a lot. There's a lot of new immigrants that are within Canada. There's a lot of new cultures. There's folks from Asia, from Africa, from Israel who are coming to Canada. And I think the beauty of Canada, as well as there's a lot of recognition for the we call them the First Nations people, the original people who lived on North America, on the continent, before the Europeans came to the continent, Christopher Columbus and all of that, like 400 years ago. So the community has changed quite a lot, became way more diverse. And I think the thing that attracts me the most about that is just sitting with somebody from Azerbaijan, who I've never been to, and just sitting there and like be like, can you tell me about like your favorite memory about ice cream in your childhood? You know what I mean? Like getting those beautiful stories, because you start talking about ice cream and then suddenly 10 minutes later you're talking about the religious system of Azerbaijan. You know what I mean? And I think that's very stimulating, having that kind of conversations over there now, having that place of so many impossible cultures coming together and being friends. One of my best friends and one of the people actually who sponsored me to come to Canada is an Israeli person. So having these kind of impossible relationships, having it on the ground right now in Canada is so meaningful to me. It's so moving to me, I think. Thank you for the question. That was lovely.
Yes, please, here.
I wrote in Arabic up until the day that I started writing The Clothesline Swing, which was in 2012 while I was in Lebanon. So I wrote in Arabic mainly. And then I started like English writing was because I was a journalist at the time. I worked for the Washington Post for a couple of years. So I was writing in English, but reporting. I call myself a recovering journalist, like a recovering alcoholic. I will never do that again.
Join the club.
Journalism. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for
I'm
your
about
life
to
choice.
be a recovering journalist.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Both. And I wrote some poems in English, and apparently I'm not a great poet in English.
The girl in red over there.
Yes. I think I'm still writing in Arabic. It just happened to come across as English. I'm serious. Lee would be able to tell you. My language is very flowery, very Arabic structured, long sentences, descriptions that are very like Arabian in a way. And I also find that using two languages to describe the same thing is such an interesting dilemma. Like, for example, in Arabic, in very original, like the Arabic Gulf Arabic, if somebody is happy, they say "athleja sadri," which means my heart iced. While in Canada, when somebody is happy, they say, my heart's warmed up. My heart is warm now. And like just thinking about like how languages navigate those differences. Because somebody in Saudi Arabia in the desert, they want to be happy. They want their heart to be iced. It's so hot. It's so damn hot in there. While the opposite goes for the Canadian.
That's a great example, yes. Yes, please, here.
Well, I have two questions as well, but if one of them is too long, then so anyway, I just wanted to ask about the coastline plane. It actually takes place in the future.
Yep.
But there are no evidence of.
There is no laser guns.
I just wanted to say that I just love it because it makes connecting it easier. It made it less technical.
It was. I really did. I considered laser guns. No, I didn't. It's not Star Trek. I have to say that what I wanted to write with the clothesline swing, I wanted to write with wisdom, and that came from looking at those two characters as they are much older. And I read a lot of gay fiction, The main character in literally 95% of every gay fiction is a 18-year-old white boy who's just coming to his sexuality. All right, like I'm thinking of writing like a book called Your Average Joe or something, but under a fake name, not under Ahmad Danny Ramadan, where it's about like Joe, the 18-year-old boy who meets another person, white person with a white person name, another Joe. So the two Joes, one of them is, and like write a whole story about that. And I'm sure I'll end up being a bestseller and I'll get a lot of money out of it. No, like to go back to being serious. I'm sorry I keep turning into this clown thing that I am. I just wanted to write from the perspective of a gay elder Syrian person, and I wanted to write it. Hakawati is the name of the character. Is an actual job in Syria and Damascus. There are people who sit in cafes and their job is to tell stories, and they're usually very old. And I really connected with all of this. The only problem is I wanted my characters to arrive to Canada after the civil war in Syria, so they needed to be a certain age. So I had to be in the future, but at the same time, I didn't want laser guns. I didn't want to take it into speculative fiction. I didn't want the what if. I didn't want holographic screens and stuff like that. Not to mention that I think we are stuck. Technologically speaking, we're stuck. We get the same iPhone every single year. It's just a bit thinner, So,
Another question? Wow, so many questions. We have 5 minutes, so we'll have 4 questions. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, in your book, there is a bit about pop culture, about like Marvel comics, Thor and Loki,
yes.
things like that. So, and it really, I think, it really connected to the experience of an outsider, of someone who's doing something that is forbidden in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say something about that? That's part of the book. Is it like biographical?
Sure. Hi, Nivette. Hi. She's apparently they have a fangirl club for me here, which is there's those 5
You have
ladies.
a fan club here.
I know.
Wow.
I'm equally surprised.
You're
I
hot,
swear.
Wow, already. When was the book published here? Last year.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm very like, and apparently they talk about how handsome I am, and I'm like, okay, thank you, I appreciate. I'm taken. He's right there. So I'm so sorry. No, I'm not shy. No, not at all. I think it is autobiographical. I have to say I grew up with comics in my life. Grey's Anatomy is my favorite TV show. I still watch it. I think honestly the longest meaningful relationship I have in my life is with Meredith Grey from Grey's Anatomy. We have been friends for 15 years, so you know.
Though she doesn't know it yet.
She doesn't know it yet. She'll meet me one day. Ellen Papino.
Yeah.
She's going to meet me one day and be like, "Oh, Danny." She'll know me right away. No, she wouldn't. So yes, it is autobiographical, and I think what makes the book connect with people is that I try to be as authentic to an experience as possible. And part of that, every writer in the room would tell you, part of that is taking some of your own peculiar little things and adding them into the book. Neither of those characters are me, like the Hakawati or the listener, neither of them are Danny. I think both of them are. You see what I mean? So and that's why I included that in the book. Next question.
Yes, please, here.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Assyrian. I'm Ashuri. Which means that I belong to this beautiful heritage of 8,000 years now. They were the very first empire in a way back in the day, 7,000 years ago. Also, they have a beautiful mythology that I truly identify with. They used to have queens rather than kings. Which
Very
is
wise.
very. I agree. I completely agree. I would rather have a queen than a king, to be honest, or a drag queen. Either or. And they use, when the queen passed away, they say that as a sign of respect, they used to bury the queen sitting rather than laying down. Like they would bury the queen with the throne that she ruled on, and I find that really beautiful.
But you speak about heritage of 7,000 years ago. What about modern Syria? As a Syrian, what
As
do
a
you...
Syrian, our heritage is we have such a vast writers, like beautiful writers that bring so much beauty into the word. Nizar Qabbani comes to mind. I'm sure people here have heard about Nizar Qabbani. He is a Syrian Damascus poet who was kicked out of Syria, very similar to me. But less violent interactions, I guess, and lived in London most of his life because he would write poetry against the regime. We have beautiful theater. We're very involved in theater. Also, our traditions, they call them Islamic, but they're not. Like we have traditions in Syria, like the Musahir, which I talked about in the book, which is the person who runs around and like knocks on doors at 4 o'clock in the morning in Ramadan to wake people up for their suhoor. And that's something that goes back actually into the Ashuri times, because there was somebody, his job was to wake up all the workers to go to work out in farms at 3 o'clock in the morning when it's when a certain weather comes along. So we have traditions that we morphed into a more Islamic thing because we became an Islamic community, but still they have a place in
the culture.
In culture itself. Yeah.
Do you fast, by the way? Do you
God,
keep
no,
the
I'm
Ramadan?
not a Muslim at all. No, I'm the worst. However, they allowed me into the Aqsa Mosque. They allowed me in because I have the last name, the Ramadan last name.
Yeah, that's a name.
Not Matthew. They didn't allow Matthew. They didn't allow my earring. They're like, you can go in, but not your earring. I'm like, okay. Took it off, went in, took videos, came out.
Okay, and last question over there. Yes.
Old Jerusalem looks like Damascus, looks like old Damascus. I felt like I'm in old Damascus. It felt so realistically representative of the same culture. At the same time, this place is equally tense as Damascus. I have to say, like, I don't mean that in a negative way. Please don't take it in a negative way, but this place is tense.
I think we understand what you mean.
Everybody, like, I'm having such intense conversations all the time, and I don't think those conversations are about me. Like, I think that as a Syrian man, as somebody who you would never meet otherwise, you come to me and you ask me questions that has nothing to do with me. It has something to do with you, of who you are, and you're reflecting those questions back to me. So we end up having this intense conversation because it is about who I am, my identity itself, that it's something that is within the core of who I am, as well as something within the core of who you are. So we end up having this really intense conversation. Yeah. And that feels very Syrian.
So I wish for you and me to have a hummus one day in Damascus.
I wish the
think
same,
this is the
yes.
great way to end this conversation.
Thank you.
All the
Thank
best.
Thank
you very
Appreciate
much
it.
for coming.
Thank you so much. It was lovely. Thank you
you.
so much. Yes.
תודה רבה לכם.